The millionaire who bought me thought he was purchasing silence. A pair of hands. A bowed head. Someone to keep his dying son alive and know her place. He was wrong. Because the night that boy stopped breathing, I did something no one in that house had the courage to do. I knelt beside his bed, and I asked God to take my life instead. The child lived. But that wasn't the part they never forgot. What they never forgot was what I asked for after. Because I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for mercy. And I didn't ask the master to thank me. I looked a millionaire in the eye and told him to make sure his son grew up hating everything his family stood for. That was the moment his whole house changed. Not in one night, not all at once, but enough that no one who lived through it ever forgot my name. Savannah, Georgia, 1859. The air near the river always carried two smells at once: salt and money. You could stand at the edge of the market district and feel both of them settling on your skin. One came from the water, the other came from men in good coats, men with ledgers, men who built whole lives out of things they never intended to carry themselves. I was 26 years old the morning August Vale bought me. Old enough to know what kind of man bids fast. Old enough to know what kind of man waits. Old enough to understand that either way, you do not go home. My name was Naomi. I held it quietly inside myself, the way some women hold a prayer between their teeth. Names could be taken, changed, shortened, mocked, but if you were careful, if you kept one true thing buried deep enough, sometimes it survived. The trader called me strong, healthy, suitable for domestic service, good with children. He did not mention my son. He did not mention the little boy taken from my arms 8 months earlier and sold inland before sunrise. He did not mention the scar near my shoulder where another woman had tried to hold on to me while they pulled us apart. He did not mention that after that day, I stopped crying in front of other people because I had learned tears were the one thing men like him considered free entertainment. He said what buyers wanted to hear: that I was useful, that I was manageable, that I would not cause trouble. That last part was the lie. Not because I shouted, not because I fought openly. Women like me learned early that open defiance was often just another road into a grave. No, the lie was simpler. I still believed there were things in this world more powerful than ownership. Love, memory, God. And once a person believes that, they are never as manageable as they look. August Vale stood apart from the other men at the sale. Not louder. Not cruder. Worse. He had the stillness of someone who had never once doubted that the world would move when he pointed. Broad shoulders, silver at the temples, gloves too fine for the heat. A face made respectable by money and sharpened by habit. The kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because everyone around him had already agreed to hear it as authority. He looked at me once. Not like a man looks at a woman, like a man looks at a missing tool he has finally found. "There," he said. That was all. The bidding ended almost before it began. No one liked bidding against August Vale. Men with that much money make competition feel impolite. By noon, I was in his carriage, headed toward the city house on Gaston Street, where his son had been sick long enough to exhaust prayer, medicine, and patience in equal measure. The Vales owned cotton inland, warehouses near the docks, ships, insurance, bank paper. They had so much money it had stopped meaning numbers and become atmosphere. It was in the curtains, in the silver, in the way servants moved before being called, in the way strangers stepped aside on sidewalks without being asked. The city house rose 3 stories high, with pale stone and black iron balconies, tall windows, a front door so polished it reflected the street. Even before I crossed the threshold, I understood the rule of that place. Nothing inside it was allowed to look accidental. Not the flowers, not the furniture, not the people. Mrs. Vale met us in the entrance hall. Celia Vale, thin as a pressed flower and about as warm. Her dress was blue silk, her mouth small and precise, her grief, if she had any, arranged as carefully as the pearls at her throat. She didn't ask my name. She asked if I had worked with sick children before. I said yes, which was true. I had cared for children with fever, with cough, with empty bellies, with wounds no one treated, because the people who owned them had already calculated the cost of neglect. But I knew what she meant. She meant white children, children whose suffering counted. "You will remain on the 2nd floor," she said, "with the boy. You will not leave him unattended. You will speak only when necessary. If he worsens, you call for the doctor. If he sleeps, you do not wake him. If he cries, you calm him. If he dies—" She stopped there. Not because the thought hurt, because saying it aloud might make it real. August finished the sentence for her. "He will not." It was not hope, it was command. A man like that spoke to death the same way he spoke to clerks and coachmen. As if refusal were not an option. They took me upstairs without another word. The hallway was dim and cool. The carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. Paintings lined the walls. Dead men, pale women. Children posed beside dogs and fruit and things they did not understand. At the far end waited the room that had already consumed 4 other caretakers in less than a year. The nursemaid before me had left 2 weeks earlier. One fled. One was dismissed. One took ill. One simply stopped returning after a night when the boy's fever rose so high she thought he would die before dawn. They opened the door. I stepped inside. And the smell hit first. Camphor, vinegar, burned tallow. The sweet, sour scent of sickness that lingers where a body has been fighting too long. Julian Vale lay in a bed too large for him. 8 years old. Thin wrists. Hollow cheeks. Lips pale enough to disappear against the pillow when the light struck them wrong. His hair was damp with fever, his breathing shallow, his eyes open, but not really seeing. On the table beside him stood bottles, spoons, folded cloths, a small silver bell he was too weak to ring. The room had everything money could buy except the one thing it had failed to keep: health. I moved to the bed slowly. Not because I was afraid of him. Because I knew what it meant when rich people looked at a child and saw inheritance before they saw a person. Boys like him were not just loved, they were invested in, measured against futures built by other men. I had seen children like that before, lonely in rooms full of expensive things, handled carefully, known poorly. He turned his head when he heard me. His eyes found my face, not frightened, just tired. Then he spoke, barely louder than breath. Did they buy you for me? No one had prepared me for that question. Not the directness, not the clarity, not the fact that he already understood enough to ask it. I stood there with my hands folded in front of my apron and realized, in that vast, beautiful room, the child knew exactly what had been done. Did they buy you for me? No one had prepared me for that question. Not the directness, not the clarity, not the fact that he already understood enough to ask it. I could have said no. Could have softened it. Could have given him the kind of answer children are usually given in houses like this. Something gentle. Something false. But the boy's eyes were fixed on mine in a way that made lying feel like another kind of violence. Yes, I said quietly. They did. He didn't look shocked. Didn't cry. Didn't even look confused. He just turned his head back toward the ceiling and whispered, "That must be expensive." There it was. The language he had been taught. The only way he knew how to understand the world. Everything had a cost. Everything had a place. And now, so did I. I picked up the cloth from the basin and dipped it into the cool water. Wrung it out slowly. Placed it against his forehead. He closed his eyes the moment it touched his skin. A small breath leaving him like he had been holding it all day. "Does it hurt?" I asked. Not because I didn't know, but because sometimes people need to be asked anyway. "All the time," he said. "Even when I'm not moving." I nodded. There was no comfort in pretending otherwise. "Then we'll make it hurt less," I said. Not a promise. A decision. That first day passed in silence more than words. I learned his medicines. His schedule. The way his breathing changed before the fever rose. The way his fingers curled when pain came too quickly. The house moved around us. Doors opening and closing. Voices drifting up the stairs. Footsteps stopping just short of the threshold. No one stayed long. Not his mother, not his father, not the doctor who came, checked his pulse, frowned, and left instructions that sounded more like habits than hope. They all stood at the edge of the bed. Looked down, spoke in careful tones, and then left. As if staying too long might force them to feel something they had no intention of carrying. That night, I was given a chair beside the bed. No mattress, no blanket, no permission to sleep. Just the understanding that if the boy needed something, I would already be there. The candles burned low, the room softened into shadows, and somewhere past midnight, he began to cry. Not loudly, not like a child demanding attention, but quietly, like someone who had learned that asking didn't always bring anyone. "Mother," he whispered. Then again, "Mother." No one came. I sat there, listening to that small voice reach into a house full of people, and come back empty. And I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not yet, something older. Something that remembered another child calling for me in the dark, and my arms being empty. I leaned forward, just enough for my voice to reach him. "I'm here." He turned his head toward me. Eyes still closed, breathing uneven. "Don't leave," he whispered. "I won't." This time, it was a promise. I didn't know when I started singing. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was memory.
Maybe it was the only thing I had left that no one had ever managed to take from me.
The melody came first. Soft, slow. Then the words. Low enough that they wouldn't carry past the door. Strong enough that they could hold a child together. Songs my mother had taught me. Songs she said were older than the people who sang them. Songs that carried hope inside them, like something hidden and alive. He stopped crying. Not all at once, but slowly, the way a storm leaves. His breathing settled. His hand, which had been clenched in the sheets, loosened, turned, and found mine. I didn't pull away, didn't think about permission, didn't think about rules. I just held it. Because sometimes the body knows what the mind is still afraid to admit. That comfort matters more than distance. He slept. For the first time since I had entered that room. He truly slept. Morning came slowly. Light slipping through the curtains. The house waking in careful layers. When Mrs. Vale entered, she stopped in the doorway. Not because of me. Because of him. He was still asleep. Peaceful. His face softer than she had seen it in weeks. She stepped closer. Touched his forehead. Looked at me. "What did you do?" she asked. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't suspicion. It was something in between. As if she could not quite believe that rest could come without permission from the world she understood. "I stayed," I said. That was all. Because that was all she would accept. Days began to fall into rhythm after that. Medicine, water, cloths, silence. And when night came, songs. He started waiting for them. I could see it in the way his eyes followed the window as the light faded. In the way his fingers tightened slightly when the room grew quiet. "You'll sing tonight?" he asked once. "Yes." He nodded, satisfied. As if that one certainty was enough to hold the rest of the world together. He began to ask questions, small at first, careful. "Where did you come from? Do you have family? Did someone sing to you like that?" Each one a step closer to something neither of us was supposed to name. I answered simply. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because truth, in a house like this, had to be given in pieces. Yes. I had a son. He turned his head quickly at that, eyes sharper, more awake than I had seen them yet. "Where is he?" The question landed clean, no hesitation. No understanding of what it might break open. I kept my hand steady, kept the cloth moving across his forehead, kept my voice even. "I don't know." He stared at me, longer this time, trying to understand something that had no place in the world he had been taught. "They just took him." "Yes." "Why?" I met his eyes then. Not long, just enough. "Because they could." He didn't speak after that, but something changed. I saw it in the way he watched the door when servants passed. In the way his gaze lingered when someone stood too long without sitting. In the way he noticed. Children learn the rules of their world early. But sometimes, all it takes is one truth to make those rules start to crack. Children learn the rules of their world early. But sometimes, all it takes is one truth to make those rules start to crack. After that day, Julian began to watch everything. Not the way children usually look. Not with curiosity alone, but with something sharper. Something that asked, "Is this right?" He noticed who stood and who sat. Who spoke and who waited. Who was answered, And who was ignored? He noticed that I never ate when he ate, that I stood while he rested, that I never once called him by his name unless he asked me to. And one afternoon, he finally said it. "You're always here, but you're not allowed to be here." I looked at him. He was sitting up for the first time that week. Thin shoulders wrapped in a blanket. Eyes clearer, but not softer. "That's a strange thing to say," I told him. "It's true," he said. "They need you, but they don't treat you like they need you." There it was again. The crack. Widening. I said nothing. Because there are truths you don't explain to a child. You let them discover. His strength returned slowly. Not all at once. Never enough to forget the weakness. He could sit, then stand, then walk a few steps between the bed and the window. Each victory was noted, measured, recorded like an investment finally beginning to pay off. The doctor took credit. Of course he did. Men like him always did. "The treatments are working," he said. "The crisis has passed." He spoke in long words, complicated phrases, as if naming something made it his. But I had been there. In the night, when no one else stayed, when breath slowed and hands trembled, and the world narrowed to one small body trying not to let go. I knew when the change began, and it had not started with medicine. It had started with something else. Something no one in that house wanted to name. Julian didn't speak of that night, not at first. But he remembered. I saw it in the way he looked at me sometimes. Longer than before, as if trying to understand something just beyond reach. One evening, as the light faded and I began to hum the first notes of a song, he stopped me. "You said something," he whispered, "that night." I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean?" "You were talking, but not to me." I didn't answer right away. Because children hear more than adults think they do, and remember more than they should. "I was praying," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did it work?" That question, so simple, so impossible. I looked at him, at the color returning to his face, at the breath that no longer rattled, at the life that had almost slipped away, and somehow didn't. "You're still here," I said. He thought about that, then nodded slowly. Then it worked. In his world, that was enough. But something else had taken root. Something deeper than recovery. Something that did not belong to the house, or to his father, or to the rules he had been taught. He began asking different questions. "Do you believe God listens to everyone?" "Yes." "Even people like you?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I understood what he was really asking. "People like me," I repeated. He hesitated. Then, "People my father says are less." There it was. Spoken out loud. The thing that shaped everything in that house. Finally given a voice. I met his eyes, fully this time. "God doesn't see people the way your father does." Silence settled between us. Not empty, but full. Like something had been placed in the room that neither of us could move around anymore. He didn't argue. Didn't question. Just absorbed it. Because children know when something is true, even if it doesn't match what they've been told. Downstairs, life continued as it always had. Dinner parties, visitors, laughter behind closed doors, the sound of glasses, the rustle of silk, the quiet movement of servants carrying things they would never taste. Mr. Vale returned each evening, checked his son, nodded at improvement, left. He spoke to me only when necessary, and even then, never directly. Make sure he eats. Keep him quiet. Don't let him tire himself. Instructions. Not conversation. But I noticed something. Something small. Something he didn't realize he was doing. He stayed longer. Not much. A minute. Sometimes 2. Standing at the edge of the bed, watching. Watching his son. Watching me. As if trying to understand how something he had already paid for had done something he could not measure. Because money explained everything in his world. Except this. Except the way a boy who had been slipping away had come back. Except the way he now held my hand, without asking. Except the way he looked at me, not as something owned, but as someone. That was the beginning. Not the healing. That had already happened. The beginning of something far more dangerous. Because once a child sees another human being clearly, truly clearly, it becomes very hard to teach them to look away again. Because once a child sees another human being clearly, truly clearly, it becomes very hard to teach them to look away again. Julian stopped looking away. At first, it was quiet. Small things. He noticed when I was tired. Noticed the way I leaned slightly against the chair after standing too long. The way my hands slowed when I thought no one was watching. You should sit, he said once. I'm fine. You're not, he said. You always say that. I almost smiled. Almost. I'm not allowed, I told him. He frowned. Not allowed by who? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He already knew. That afternoon, when no one else was in the room, he pulled himself up straighter in the bed. Looked at the chair. Then at me. Sit. I shook my head. Julian, sit, he said again. Quieter this time. But firmer. It wasn't an order. Not like his father's. It didn't come from habit. It came from something else. Something he was still learning how to name. I hesitated. Because rules like that don't disappear just because a child ignores them. They linger. They wait. They punish. But he was watching me, waiting. And for a moment, I was tired of standing. So I sat. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to see it. He smiled. Small, but real. And something in that room shifted again. Not loud. Not visible. But real enough that I felt it settle into the space between us. Downstairs. They would not have noticed. To them, nothing had changed. The house still ran on the same rules, the same order, the same quiet agreement about who mattered and who did not. But upstairs, in that room, something had already begun to break. It didn't take long for others to notice. Not the sitting, not the small things, but the way Julian spoke. He began to ask questions at the table. Not loudly, not rebelliously, just honestly. Why does Naomi stand when we sit? His mother froze. Just for a second. Then smiled the way she always did when something unpleasant needed to disappear. That's how things are done, she said. But why? Because. That was always the answer. Because it had always been that way. Because no one questioned it. Because questioning it would mean admitting something no one in that room was ready to face. Julian didn't look satisfied. But he didn't push further. Not yet. Later, his father called him into the study. I wasn't there. But I heard the tone. Low. Controlled. The way men speak when they are deciding whether something is a problem or a threat. When Julian returned, he was quiet. Quieter than usual. Did I do something wrong? He asked me that night. No. They said I shouldn't ask those questions. I looked at him. Really looked. At the boy who had almost died, and come back into a world that now made less sense than before. What kind of questions? I asked. He hesitated. Then. The kind that make people uncomfortable. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. They don't like those. Why? Because uncomfortable questions don't stay small. They grow. They spread. They reach into places people have spent their whole lives trying not to look. Because sometimes, I said carefully, the answer changes things. He was quiet again. Thinking. Always thinking now. That was when I understood something. Something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Saving his life. That had been one thing. A moment. A night. A prayer. But this was something else. This was slower. More dangerous. Because it didn't end. It didn't stop when the fever broke. It didn't disappear when the doctor took credit. It didn't fade when the house returned to its routine. It stayed. Growing quietly. Inside a child who had begun to see the world differently. And I realized. This was the part they would fear. Not the healing. Not the prayer. Not even me. But what came after. Because if Julian grew up remembering, truly remembering, what had happened in that room, he would never become the man his father expected him to be. And in a house built on certainty, on control, on the belief that everything could be owned, that kind of change was the most dangerous thing of all. And in a house built on certainty, on control, on the belief that everything could be owned, that kind of change was the most dangerous thing of all. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing that truly matters ever does. Julian didn't wake up one morning and decide the world was wrong. He didn't stand in the dining room and declare anything. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just stopped accepting. Stopped repeating what he was told. Stopped looking away. And that was enough. It showed in the smallest ways. Ways no one noticed at first. He said thank you to people no one thanked. He asked names, used them, remembered them. He waited when others spoke over servants. When instructions were given like commands to objects, he hesitated, watching, listening, learning something no one in that house had ever tried to teach him, that people were not things. His mother noticed first, not what he was becoming, but what he was no longer doing. "He's changed," she said one evening, her voice low, concerned in the way people become concerned when something doesn't fit the shape they expect. "He's recovering," August replied. That's all. But it wasn't all. And he knew it. Because he had seen the beginning. He had stood in that doorway, watched me kneel, heard words no one in his world was supposed to speak. And though he would never admit it, not to her, not to anyone, he had not forgotten. A week later, he called me into his study. The same room, the same silence, the same weight in the air that came with being summoned by a man who never asked twice. I stood in the doorway, hands folded, eyes lowered, the way I had been taught. "Look at me," he said. I did, slowly. That alone was enough to change the room. Enough to remind both of us. This was not how things were supposed to work. But he didn't correct it. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't punish me. He just watched. Studied. "You've had an effect on him," he said. Not accusation. Not praise. Just fact. He asks questions now. Yes. You answer them. When I can. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Measured. "What did you say to him?" he asked. There were 1,000 safe answers. 1,000 ways to step back into the role he expected. 1,000 ways to disappear. But I had already crossed that line. That night, on my knees, with nothing left to lose, I told him the truth, I said. He exhaled slowly. Not anger. Not yet. Something else. Something like resistance. To an idea he did not want to follow. "And what truth is that?" he asked. "That people are not meant to be owned." There it was. Said plainly. In his house. In his study. To his face. The kind of sentence that could end a life. He didn't move. Didn't interrupt. Didn't call for anyone. He just looked at me. Longer this time. Like he was trying to decide. If I was dangerous. Or if I had always been. And he had simply never noticed. "You're teaching him to reject everything this family is built on," he said. Yes. No hesitation. No apology. Why? Because that was the question, wasn't it? Not what I had done, but why I dared to do it. I held his gaze. Steady. Unmoving. Because he lived, I said. And that has to mean something. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. "You think saving him gives you that right?" he asked. No. I think it gives him a choice. That landed. I saw it. In the tightening of his jaw. In the shift of his weight. In the way his certainty faltered. Just slightly. Because men like August Vale believed in many things. Power. Order. Inheritance. control. But choice, real choice, was not something they offered. He turned away, walked to the window, looked out at the street below, where everything still moved exactly as it always had. Carriages, men in coats, women in silk, servants stepping aside, heads lowered. The world he understood, the world he controlled. But behind him, in that room, something had already begun to slip beyond his reach. "You will remain with him," he said finally. "Not permission, not kindness, just decision. But you will be careful what you say." I didn't answer, because we both knew that was not something I could promise. He turned back, looked at me one last time. And for the first time since I had entered that house, there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Not anger, not authority, not even doubt, fear. Not of me, not exactly, but of what I had already started, and what he could not stop without admitting something he had spent his whole life refusing to see. That night, I returned to Julian's room. He was waiting, sitting by the window, stronger now, more present. "Did he talk to you?" he asked. "Yes." "Am I in trouble?" I stepped closer, looked at him, really looked. "No," I said. "Not yet." He frowned. "What does that mean?" I smiled, just a little. "It means you're starting to understand something." "What?" "That the world you were born into is not the world you have to accept." He was quiet, thinking again, always thinking now. And I knew, as I watched him sit there, alive, awake, changing, that this was the moment everything after would grow from. Not the night I prayed, not the moment he survived, but this quiet shift, this refusal to believe what he had been taught. This was what no one in that house would ever forget.